The mystery of D.B. Cooper remains without a clue, a case that the FBI referred to as one of the great mysteries in FBI history. But what is actually the secret behind this story, and what is the case surrounding it? Keep watching till the end as we find out. This is Solved Files, a place where crime stories are being brought to your doorstep. What are you waiting for? Just hit the subscribe button for more fascinating and suspense-filled crime stories. Now, let's get back into this story and uncover this mystery. On Wednesday, November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, Dan Cooper purchased a $20 one-way ticket on Northwest Orient Airlines for flight number 305 from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. According to the description, Cooper was in his mid-40s and was dressed in an office suit, black tie, brown shoes, a white shirt, and a raincoat. He carried a dark briefcase and a paper bag measuring 4 by 12 by 14 inches. Before takeoff, Cooper, who was seated in seat 18C, placed an order for a bourbon and soda.
Thank you.
Cooper gave the stewardess a letter shortly after 3 p.m. when the plane took off. Initially, she simply placed the note in her pocket without examining it, but Cooper said to her,
Mr. Cooper?
You might want to take a look at that note.
"Miss, you better examine that note. I have a bomb." Like, seriously? A bomb? Or was he joking? Cooper urged her to sit next to him and informed her that the bomb was in his briefcase. When he opened his briefcase, an endless number of wires around a few red-colored sticks were seen. Subsequently, Cooper requested that the stewardess record his words and send them to the captain. "I would like to receive $200,000 in cash by 5 p.m., packaged in a rucksack. 2 front and 2 back parachutes are what I desire. I want a fuel truck ready to fill up when we land. No funny stuff, or I'm going to complete the job." One peculiar aspect was that Cooper requested that the $200,000 be paid out only in $20 bills. When the jet touched down in Seattle,
Copy. Orient 305.
Cooper seized the 36 occupants for the cash and the parachute he had asked for. The parachutes were delivered to him, and Captain Scott informed Cooper they would be landing shortly at 5:24 PST. Flight 305 touched down at Seattle-Tacoma Airport at 5:46 p.m. PST. Scott parked the plane far from the main terminal on a runway that was just half lit. With Cooper's approval, Cooper insisted that the aircraft's front door and the mobile air stairs be the only points of entry and escape, and that only one airline agent approach the plane carrying parachutes and cash. However, Al Lee, the operations manager for Northwest Orient in Seattle, was assigned as the courier. Lee dressed in civilian clothes for the mission, figuring that Cooper wouldn't confuse his airline outfit for a law enforcement officer's. A member of the ground staff attached the movable stairs while the passengers stayed seated. Mucklow got off the plane at the front door, as instructed by Cooper, and took the ransom money. Upon her return, she walked Cooper in the final row, past the seated passengers, carrying the money bag. After that, Cooper consented to the passengers' release. Cooper examined the currency as they disembarked. Mucklow joked that she could have some of the money, hoping to defuse the situation. She added that earlier in the flight, Cooper had attempted to tip her and the other 2 flight attendants with cash from his personal wallet, but they had all rejected it, citing the airline rules. Cooper and the 6 staff members were the only ones still on board after the passengers had safely disembarked. Mucklow went outside the aircraft 3 times to retrieve the parachutes, which she brought to Cooper in the back of the aircraft, as per Cooper's orders. Schaffner asked Cooper if she could get her pocketbook out of the compartment beneath his seat, while Mucklow loaded the parachutes. With the agreement, Cooper assured her, "I won't bite you." Cooper said, "Whatever you girls would like," so Hancock and Schaffner debarked. To Flight Attendant Hancock's question about whether the flight attendants could depart, Cooper claimed he didn't need the printed instructions for utilizing the parachutes that Mucklow had taken with her when she delivered the last parachute. Due to a delay in the refueling procedure, a second and subsequently a third truck were brought to the aircraft to finish the refueling. Cooper had protested that the money was given in a cloth bag rather than a rucksack, as he had instructed, and Mucklow added that during the wait, Cooper had to come up with a new plan for how to carry the money. Cooper took a pocket knife and cut the canopy off of one of the reserve parachutes. He then slipped some cash inside the parachute bag that was left empty. Cooper turned down an FAA official's request for a face-to-face meeting while they were on the plane. Cooper lost patience and said, "Let's get this show on the road. This shouldn't take so long." He then presented his flight plan and instructions to the cockpit crew, directing them to head southeast toward Mexico City at the lowest airspeed, roughly 100 knots, or 185 kilometers per h, or 115 mph, and the highest altitude they could go, which was 10,000 feet, 3,000 meters. Cooper added requirements for maintaining cabin pressure, keeping the landing gear in place, and lowering the wing flaps by 15 degrees. First Officer Raditzak informed Cooper that a second refueling would be necessary before approaching Mexico because of this arrangement, which limited the aircraft's range to about 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers. However, after deliberating over their alternatives, Cooper and the crew decided to refuel at Reno Tahoe International Airport. Cooper also gave the order to lift off with the air stair extended and the rear exit door open. The Home Office of Northwest opposed it, citing safety concerns. In response, Cooper remarked, "It can be done. Do it," without disputing the idea, and added that once they were in the air, he would lower the stairs. He insisted that Mucklow stay on board to support the mission. Cooper requested that the aircraft stay below 10,000 feet, while he had several crew members stay on board, and the plane took off for Mexico City. Cooper donned the black wraparound sunglasses with dark rims that would eventually be featured in the renowned sketch that would be known to all those acquainted with the case during the second part of the flight. Cooper disappeared out the back doors of the Boeing 727 with the money and 2 parachutes just after 8 o'clock at night, while the aircraft was halfway between Seattle and Reno, Nevada. But before falling, Cooper removed his black J.C. Penney clip-on tie, which is significant because it provides proof that the FBI was able to obtain a DNA sample. Now that we have a sample of DNA from the tie, let's begin the inquiry to find out who was calling himself Dan Cooper. The Northwest hijacking case, or NORJAC for short, would take decades to resolve. There was a thorough search of the aircraft for evidence. The FBI had revealed the serial numbers of the $20 notes that Cooper had stolen, so people were even more interested in finding out who was behind the bills and how to get them back. Interestingly, 9 years after Cooper's escape, in 1980, a small child discovered a decaying parcel containing $20 bills that matched the serial numbers of the ransom money, a total of $5,800. When the youngster and his father were building a bonfire on the beach at Tina Bar, the boy discovered the bills. It seems that there is a theory that the money may have fallen into the Washougal River as Cooper sprang out and then made its way to Tina Bar. But in the end, this finding would yield no results as the FBI searched the nearby beaches and turned up nothing more. Several letters were written to the FBI, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, and the Seattle Times in the year that followed the hijacking. In them, the writers either confessed to the crime, paid tribute to D.B. Cooper, who had recently passed away, or claimed to be his brother. Actually, 2 men named Donald Sylvester Murphy and William John Lewis were placed under federal arrest in November 1972 on extortion charges for posing as Cooper and selling his juicy details to a tabloid. During the course of the first 5 years of the inquiry, nearly 800 people were taken into consideration while leads were being pursued across the nation. All but 24 suspects were disqualified from further analysis. The FBI is unsure of the origins of the initials DB, which is one oddity that has no bearing on the case. He claimed that a wire agency made a mistake and referred to him as DB Cooper rather than Dan Cooper, the name he used when buying the plane ticket. Still, Cooper's physical description is regarded as being extremely realistic.
We corrected him and told him the guy's name was Dan Cooper, but DB is catchier than Dan, so the name stuck with him forever.
The night of the hijacking, 2 flight attendants interviewed him individually after spending hours with him aboard the aircraft. Cooper was described by them in almost exacting detail. He was 5 feet, 10 to 6 feet tall, weighed between 180 pounds, was in his mid-40s, and had brown eyes. Those who had direct contact with him described him in similar terms. His vocabulary was described as bright, yet his voice was described as quiet and unaccented. The first accusation against Cooper was air piracy, but that was subject to a 5-year statute of limitations. As time passed and no suspects were found guilty, Cooper was eventually charged by a grand jury for violating the Hobbs Act. A federal law known as the Hobbs Act was created to outlaw extortion. It has no statute of limitations, so even if the FBI inquiry has already been canceled, Cooper could still face charges if he were discovered tomorrow. Before focusing on potential suspects, it is important to note that the pilot informed authorities that it was he, not Cooper, who had selected the plane's itinerary. Given that Cooper knew he was about to jump out of a plane, it's a little surprising that he only asked for Mexico City as his final destination. Since there was no cooperation regarding the route from Cooper, and consequently, no coordinated drop-off place, it appears that Cooper had no accomplice. One intriguing aspect of this case is how well thought out everything seemed to be until he leaped out of the aircraft. Now, who might be the suspect working with Cooper? With that, let's jump into the suspects. Meanwhile, Richard Floyd McCoy is the first suspect, and apparently the top choice of former federal probation officer Bernie Rhodes and retired FBI agent Russell Kalema wrote a book about the case. The FBI detained Richard Floyd McCoy in April 1972, 5 months after Cooper's escape, for hijacking an aircraft. Examined closely, there are unmistakable similarities between the Cooper and McCoy heists. McCoy, like Cooper, took control of an aircraft and made a parachute jump. Using the same technique Cooper used to jump out of a Boeing 727, McCoy sprang out of its rear stairway. Like Cooper, McCoy remained composed throughout the heist and asked for 4 parachutes. Both of the men allegedly handed letters indicating there was a bomb on board to the flight attendants. A detail that takes on much more significance when you realize that the words "no funny stuff" were purportedly included in notes written by both McCoy and Cooper. The fact that both incidents allegedly happened while McCoy was on break from Brigham Young University raises more questions about this strange coincidence. The most intriguing detail may be that, according to Kalem and Rhodes, McCoy's family members discovered a thing that Cooper had left on the aircraft. This object was never made public. Some people on the internet seem to think that this object was a medallion from Brigham Young University with McCoy's initials on it. However, this seems to be based only on the case's Wikipedia page, which means that this is probably not a fact. Whether McCoy is Cooper or not, the FBI finally disqualified him from consideration as a suspect in the Cooper case, primarily because he didn't fit the flight attendants' descriptions of Cooper. Nonetheless, Kalemi and Rhodes noted that the 2 males had comparable looks. Furthermore, the day following the hijacking, McCoy was in Utah having Thanksgiving dinner with his family, according to FBI archives. In comparison with Cooper, McCoy was apprehended following his theft and given a 45-year prison term. In reality, McCoy would escape capture from a penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, and would subsequently perish in a gunfight with FBI officers in Virginia Beach. Dwayne Weber, who on his deathbed claimed to be D.B. Cooper, is the second suspect. According to his wife, Jo, right before he passed away, Dwayne drew her up close and introduced himself as Dan Cooper, saying, "I have a secret to tell you."
There was one key thing your husband said to you.
I'm Dan Cooper.
Jo looked again at what should have been obvious hints after learning this. Jo said that during Dwayne's nightmares, he would talk about leaving fingerprints on a plane, but he also claimed to have suffered a knee injury while leaping out of an aircraft. It was alleged that Dwayne's handwriting was discovered in the margins of a D.B. Cooper library book. Jo further asserts that Dwayne drove her to the location on Tina Bar Beach, where the money was ultimately discovered. Jo also says that Dwayne had an old Northwest Airlines ticket that he didn't seem to be using. Here is a remark on Dwayne Weber from former lead FBI agent Ralph Himmelsbach, who left the case 29 years ago. "He does have a criminal background that I've always felt was connected to the case," she said. "He does fit the physical description."
I wish he had never told me anything.
Even though Himmelsbach thought Joe Weber's narrative might be true, he didn't believe it was him. Kenneth Christensen, the author Jeffrey Gray's favorite suspect, is the third and last suspect.
At the time of the Cooper hijacking, Kenneth Christensen was a flight attendant for Northwest Orient Airlines. He knew the planes and he knew the schedules.
The hypothesis started when Lyle Christensen, Kenneth Christensen's brother, watched an Unsolved Mysteries program and thought his brother was D.B. Cooper.
I asked him, what's this all about? And he said, I know who D.B. Cooper was. And I said, how do you know that? And he said, well, I grew up with him. He was my brother.
Lyle also referred to his late brother Kenneth's confession on his deathbed. There is something you should know, but I cannot tell you, according to reports of Kenneth's words. Kenneth worked as a flight attendant for Northwest Orient Airlines, which Cooper also hijacked, adding credence to the internet rumors that it was an inside job. Kenneth reportedly had a fondness for bourbon, and not too long after the crime, he purchased a modest house. The fact that a flight attendant who had dealt with Cooper agreed that Kenneth was the most similar of all the suspects she had seen when Gray showed her a picture of the man may be the most compelling aspect of his theory. Nevertheless, she added, I can't say yes. Strangely, the FBI disproved Kenneth because he didn't match the description.
She said it looks more like D.B. Cooper than any other photo she's ever seen.
Thus, the FBI is back, this time with some really strange discrepancies. Just after World War II, Kenneth was a paratrooper, which is another reason the FBI doesn't consider him a viable candidate. The FBI considers this to be damning evidence that Cooper was not a proficient jumper. But this leads us to Special Agent Larry Carr's next suspect, or rather, his theory that D.B. Cooper did not survive the fall. In 2007, Agent Carr assumed control of the D.B. Cooper case. Here's what he had to say about it.
So we believe now that the dredging sands did not interfere with the original burial of the money, and that the money got buried there within a few months after Cooper's daring jump.
At first, we believed Cooper was a skilled jumper, possibly even a paratrooper. After a few years, we concluded that this was untrue. The other was a sewn-closed training chute. Moreover, the operational chute was an unsteerable military chute. Agent Carr has provided these additional details. No professional parachutist would have landed in the pitch-black night, in the rain, with a 200-mile-an-hour breeze in his face, while dressed in shoes and a waterproof coat. He may have died in the fall for additional reasons, such as the fact that he leaped into a wooded region at night, and that there was a 5,000-foot cloud cover at the time, obscuring his view of the ground. Naturally, the fact that his body or chute were never discovered casts doubt on this notion. The final notion we will talk about is from a group of self-described citizen sleuths who are amateur scientists. Using an electron microscope, citizen sleuths found more than 100,000 particles on D.B. Cooper's tie. They found pure titanium, strontium sulfide, and cerium among these particles.
The pollen means that this is where this tie was in the spring, not in November when he jumped. If we could track the species of pollen, and these species are rare enough, it could tell us where he came from.
Tom Kay, a researcher with Citizen Sleuth, states that these are referred to as rare earth elements. They are employed for extremely specialized purposes and in very limited domains. According to Kay, these components were uncommon in 1971, yet Boeing was using them to create a cutting-edge, supersonic transport aircraft. Furthermore, in light of the unusual materials discovered on Cooper's tie, Kay and the Citizen Sleuths speculate that Cooper might have worked for Boeing. He was not one of the individuals operating this production machinery because he brought the tie with him into these places. He worked at one of the plants as a manager or an engineer. Kay thinks that the memories of maybe one individual in the Pacific Northwest who worked in the aerospace business at the time will hold the key to identifying Cooper. In its history, the FBI has described the hunt for D.B. Cooper as one of the longest and most exhaustive investigations. The FBI case file, which encompassed over 1,000 individuals as of 2011, was 40 feet long. What we've shown here is just the tip of the iceberg. Although they are still open to receiving tips, the FBI kept the case open for 45 years until closing it in 2016. Even after all these years, people are still curious about the identity of the cunning thief known as D.B. Cooper. but the D.B. Cooper case will stay unresolved for the time being, possibly indefinitely. What do you think happened? Who could be the real D.B. Cooper? Let us know in the comment section below. Some cases remain unsolved to date. You can check that out in our previous video.